Indeed, millions of European citizens have seen their living conditions deteriorating. They have been the victims of the financial crisis. The COVID pandemic has affected them in their daily lives, followed by inflation fueled by energy and food prices. And for all these fellow citizens, the main question is how to make ends meet every month. And this affects those people at risk of poverty. But more and more, it affects also the so-called middle classes. And that's why it is important from this House and from the European Union to show that we really take serious these concerns. This is important also for Europe. Poverty remains acute in Europe. It has not significantly declined in the EU over the past few years, and citizens are quite rightly concerned. In particular, child poverty, affecting about 20 million children, has even increased over the recent years. And some groups remain more at risk than others. This concerns young people, women, ethnic minority, and migrants in particular. Obviously, the economic and social strains we face due to the multiple crises have negatively impacted on households all over Europe, leading with increased cost of living and the reduced purchasing power and available income. We know that lower-income households are mostly affected by increases in prices such as energy and food prices. A rising number of people have fallen into energy poverty. Almost 1 in 10 Europeans is unable to keep their home adequately warm. On top of that, housing affordability is an increasing challenge in the Union, in quite all member states. In 2022, almost 1 in 10 persons lived in a household where total housing costs represented more than 40% of their income, with a significant increase since 2020. And this obviously, although housing is not directly a EU competence, there is a strong demand now, coming also from member states, that EU should take a stronger role in tackling the European-wide housing crisis. We cannot turn a blind eye to the problem of working poor in the EU. This is why wage policies and the legislation on adequate minimum wages that the EU has adopted and member states have now to implement are of key importance. It's also about part-time work, imposed especially to single parents. And when I say single parents, I mean in most cases single mothers that cannot rely on affordable childcare and therefore cannot have a full-time job and a decent pay. We have seen how statutory minimum wage policies have been successful in protecting the purchasing power of workers with lower incomes in many member states. And that's why the implementation of the directive on adequate minimum wages is key. And by the way, there are a lot of good examples that increasing minimum wages quite strongly have not destroyed jobs. We see that in the European Union now, that those countries who have done that, they have even seen their unemployment rate reduced quite dramatically. Real wages significantly dropped in 22 and to a lesser extent in 23. Furthermore, upward wage convergence has been stalling, while in 24 real wages are expected to somewhat rebound. They would remain well below pre-pandemic levels for most countries. And in this context, it is crucial that euro area member states support wage developments that mitigate purchasing power losses, especially for low-income earners. And furthermore, it is essential that member states promote collective bargaining on wage setting and ensure an effective involvement of social partners. We frequently forget that wages represent a very important part of our internal demand. And precisely this internal demand in the EU has remained during the last years rather sluggish, which explains also now that our growth is quite low. Given the repeated shocks and crises, effective policies and exceptional social transfers have permitted to avoid a major worsening. Job protection during the pandemic, namely through the SURE instrument, resilience of employment, as well as increases in statutory minimum wages and income support measures have allowed to mitigate the negative social impact of the pandemic, high energy prices and inflation. But no significant progress in reducing poverty and inequalities have been achieved, notwithstanding a recent high employment rate. This is why we need to step up our efforts towards our target of reducing by 2030 the number of persons at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the EU by at least 15 million, of which at least 5 million children. And to sustain the efforts, this needs to be complemented by reaching the targets on employment and particularly skills. Technological change creates skills shortages. Companies are complaining about these skills shortages, and that's why it is absolutely important and urgent to invest more in human capital and finally to give everybody equal opportunity to precisely get the right skills and the right educational level. We should also further tackle inequalities, not only to ensure better cohesion within our societies, but also because high inequalities have a negative impact on economic growth. We need holistic approaches that combine social and economic policies as well as fair taxation. Wages are generally much more taxed than other sources of income. We must live up to our commitments. Strong welfare systems and quality jobs are needed to fight poverty and address these new challenges. In line with this, we need to put a larger focus on social investment policies and reforms. This has been the spirit of the RRF and will also be the spirit of the fiscal structural plans under the revised economic governance framework, as also discussed during Tuesday EPSCO-ECOFIN Joint Council meeting. Social investments and reforms, complemented by well-functioning social protection systems, thus have an important role in mitigating social risk and promoting upward social convergence. Tackling poverty and social exclusion is at the centre of the European Pillar of Social Rights and its action plan. I just mentioned the European Child Guarantee, the Directive on Adequate Minimum Wages, Council recommendation on adequate minimum income, the European Platform on combating homelessness, and so on. These need to be fully implemented. Now, we also support Member States by providing guidance through the European semester and with EU funding, and especially the ESF, for example, that invests 45.5 billion in social inclusion. Honourable members, the actions we have put in place have set in motion our joint undertaking to make Europe fairer and more inclusive. But we need to be consistent in the implementation and do more to ensure our social cohesion. Social cohesion is essential. Social cohesion is essential also for competitiveness. To strengthen Europe, to make it stronger in a dangerous geopolitical context, we have to have a strong solidarity between European states, member states, as well as inside our member states. We should leave nobody behind. This is also about jobs, not any jobs, good quality jobs with high productivity, with fair wages and good working conditions. We share a common goal that precariousness, poverty and social exclusion should be eradicated in Europe, and that's finally the objective of our social market economy system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Schmit. We come to the speakers of the political groups, starting with PPE and I will give the floor